Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something I've always found super interesting, the concept of crowns in heaven. We hear about them in the Bible.
Yeah, it's one of those things that can really capture your imagination, right?
Totally. But I think there's often a lot of confusion about what they actually are. Like, are we talking literal golden crowns?
Right. And that's what we're going to be exploring today. We'll be looking at what the Bible actually says about these crowns and what they might mean for us as, well, you know, as believers living our lives here and now.
Definitely. And to help us unpack all this, I've got a fantastic expert with me today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to dive into this topic. It's something I've been fascinated by for a long time.
Me too. So I guess the first question is, what are these crowns in heaven? Are they, like the crowns kings and queens wear?
That's a great place to start. And the short answer is no, not exactly. They're not physical crowns. They're more like symbolic representations of the spiritual rewards that God promises to those who follow him.
I see. So it's more of a metaphor.
Exactly.
Mm.
Think of it as a way of describing the blessings and honor that come with living a life of faith. It's like a visual representation of of the eternal significance of our choices here on earth.
Okay, that makes sense. So if they're symbolic, what exactly do these crowns represent?
Well, the Bible actually talks about several different crowns, each highlighting a different aspect of Christian life.
Really? Like what?
One that always stands out to me is the crown of righteousness, mentioned in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8.
Okay, what does that one represent?
Well, in that passage, it's talking about a crown being laid up, not just for the Apostle Paul, but for all those who eagerly await Christ's return.
Oh, wow. So it's not just for some, like, super saintly people, but for everyone who's genuinely looking forward to that moment when Christ comes back.
Absolutely. It's for all of us who are living with that hope and anticipation.
I like that. It's inclusive. So does that mean we just sit around waiting and then, bam, we get a crown?
Well, I think it's a bit more active than that. Right. The word eagerly suggests that it's not just about passively waiting, but about actively living in a way that reflects that anticipation.
I see what you mean. Like, if we truly believe that Christ is coming back, shouldn't it change how we live our lives now?
Exactly. And that's where these crowns become really practical. They're not just about some far-off future reward, but about the choices we make and the actions we take today.
Okay, so let's dig into some of these other crowns, shall we?
I'm ready when you are.
Awesome. Well, I've heard about the imperishable crown. What's that one all about?
Ah, yes. The imperishable crown, it's mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 25. He uses this analogy. It compares us to athletes who train rigorously for a temporary crown.
Right, like winning a race or a competition.
Exactly. But in this passage, it's saying that we as believers, we're striving for something far greater, a crown that lasts forever.
That puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you think about the things we invest our time and energy in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, like are we chasing after temporary rewards or are we focused on things that have eternal value?
Exactly. That's the challenge, isn't it? To
Yeah.
live with an eternal perspective, even in the midst of our everyday lives. And this passage seems to suggest that self-discipline and, prioritizing those spiritual values, that's key to obtaining that imperishable crown.
It's about making choices that reflect what we truly believe. Like, if we really believe that this life is temporary and eternity is real, shouldn't that impact how we spend our time, our money, our energy?
Absolutely. It should affect everything we do. And that brings us to another crown we've already touched on, the crown of righteousness from 2 Timothy.
Right, the one that's connected to eagerly awaiting Christ's return. How does righteousness fit into that idea of living with an eternal perspective?
Well, if we're truly looking forward to Christ's return, shouldn't we be living in a way that aligns with his righteousness? It's not just about trying to avoid sin,
Mm.
but actively pursuing holiness and obedience.
So it's not just about what we don't do, but what we do do.
Yeah, it's about actively striving to live a life that, that reflects God's character and values, and allowing our faith to permeate every aspect of our lives.
Our relationships, our work, even our leisure time.
Everything. It all matters.
Okay, two crowns down, and it's already making me think, what about the crown of life? What's the meaning behind that one?
The crown of life is found in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 12. And this one really highlights the concept of perseverance through trials.
Okay, like facing hardship and remaining faithful.
Exactly. Following Christ isn't always easy. We're going to face challenges, hardships, maybe even persecution.
Life has a way of throwing those curveballs, right?
It does. But this crown seems to suggest that there's a reward for those who persevere, those who don't give up, even when things get tough.
So it's not about how easy our lives are, but how we respond when things get hard. Do we give in to despair, or do we lean on God's strength and find a way to keep going?
That's the heart of it. It's about trusting God even when we don't understand what he's doing, even when things feel, painful or unfair.
I'm seeing a pattern here. Each crown represents a quality God values in his followers. Self-discipline, righteousness, perseverance. What other crowns are there?
Well, there's the crown of rejoicing, sometimes called the soul winner's crown.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about that one.
It's found in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 19, and it's specifically for those who lead others to Christ.
So this one's about sharing our faith and helping others find salvation.
Yeah, it's about seeing lives transformed by the power of God's grace.
Wow, I can see why it's called the crown of rejoicing. There's got to be a special kind of joy in seeing someone's life change like that.
There really is. And it reminds us that we all have a part to play in spreading the gospel, in being ambassadors for Christ in our everyday lives.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered 4 crowns now. What's the last one?
The final crown is the crown of glory. It's described in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 4. And this one holds particular significance for those who serve in leadership roles within the church.
So this one's for pastors, elders, teachers, anyone who's in a position of spiritual leadership.
Exactly. It's about shepherding God's people, caring for their spiritual well-being, and leading them towards Christ-likeness.
That sounds like an incredible responsibility.
It is, but it's also a great honor.
Mhm.
And this crown represents that selfless service. It's not about seeking personal recognition or power, but about humbly serving others and pointing them towards Christ.
It really makes you appreciate those who serve in those roles, doesn't it?
It does. It takes a lot of dedication and sacrifice,
Mm.
but the rewards are, well, they're eternal.
Wow. We've explored 5 different crowns already, and each one seems to highlight a different aspect of Christian life and service. But I have a feeling there's even more to unpack, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. There's this fascinating concept of stars in our crowns that we haven't even touched on yet.
Wait, stars. That's a new one. Tell me more about that.
All right, well, let's take a look at a couple of verses in the Bible. Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, talks about those who are wise shining like the brightness of the heavens. And those who lead many to righteousness, well, they'll shine like stars forever and ever.
That is some seriously beautiful imagery.
It is. And then there's another verse in Philippians chapter 2, verses 15 and 16 that connects this imagery to our actions here on earth. It encourages us to shine like stars as we hold on to the word of life.
So these stars, they represent the impact we make for Christ, the lives we touch, the difference we make in the world.
Exactly. It suggests that every act of kindness, every moment of sharing our faith, every effort to live out the gospel, all of that can potentially add another star to our crown.
Wow, that's really encouraging. Makes you realize that even the smallest actions can have eternal significance.
That's right. And it raises a really interesting question. What actions might contribute to adding stars to our own crown?
Now that's a question you're going to be thinking about. But before we go too deep into that, I'm curious. We've talked about receiving these crowns, but what are we supposed to do with them once we have them?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? And it leads us back to a passage we mentioned earlier, Revelation chapter 4, verses 10 and 11. Remember that scene in heaven?
Let me think. It describes the elders casting their crowns before God's throne, right?
Yes. And I think that image speaks volumes about the true purpose of these crowns. They're not meant for us to wear proudly or boast about. They're meant to be laid down at the feet of Jesus in an act of worship and gratitude.
It's a reminder that any reward we receive is ultimately because of God's grace, isn't it?
Absolutely. We can't earn our salvation, and we can't earn these crowns. They're gifts given freely out of God's love.
This has been a super insightful discussion. I feel like I'm really starting to grasp the significance of these heavenly crowns and, how they can shape our lives.
Me too. It really makes you think about what it means to live with eternity in mind, doesn't it?
It does, and I think there's so much more to explore there. Welcome back, everyone. We've been talking about these crowns in heaven, and I'm really struck by how each one represents a quality that God values. Like, it's almost like a roadmap for living a good life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's fascinating how they highlight those virtues that go beyond just, outward actions.
Right, exactly. Like, it's about the inner transformation that happens when you truly follow Christ.
Yeah, it's about the heart.
And that actually makes me think about those stars we were talking about before the break. Like, if those represent the impact we have for Christ, does that mean every good deed is like adding a star to our crown? Is it kind of like keeping score or something?
Hmm, that's a great question and one a lot of people have. But I don't think the Bible gives us a clear-cut answer on that.
Yeah.
It's not about tallying up good deeds like points on a scoreboard.
Okay, so not about racking up the most stars possible.
No, I don't think so. I mean, when you look at the verses about stars, like in Daniel 12:3, it emphasizes leading others to righteousness, shining brightly because of wisdom.
So it's more about the motivation behind the actions, right?
I think so. It's about doing things out of love for God and others, not for some kind of heavenly recognition.
I see. So it's less about like, what can I get, and more about how can I serve?
Exactly. It's about, aligning your life with God's purpose. I think that's where the true fulfillment comes in. When you're in tune with God's will, your actions become less about earning something and more about expressing who you are in Christ.
Yeah, it's like when you do something kind for someone and you're not expecting anything back in return, it just feels good to do it, right?
Exactly. And I think that genuine, selfless love, that's what really shines brightly. That's what has a lasting impact.
Okay, so if it's not about keeping score, how do we even think about living in a way that earns those stars? Or, I guess, more importantly, reflects God's love?
Right, right. I think those crowns we talked about,
Hmm.
they offer some really great insight there. Like, they paint a picture of what that life looks like, a life focused on the eternal things, characterized by self-discipline, righteousness, perseverance, sharing the gospel, serving others.
Wow, that's quite the list. Where do we even start?
It can feel overwhelming, that's for sure. But I think one practical step is looking at how we're spending our time, our talents, our resources. Are we using those things in ways that align with the qualities those crowns represent?
So instead of chasing after those temporary things like pleasure or possessions, we should be focusing on things that have eternal value.
Exactly. It's about shifting that perspective.
From the temporary to the eternal.
Right. Instead of asking, what will make me happy right now? You ask, what's going to make a difference in the long run?
It's about making choices that show we believe in eternity, even when we're going about our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think so. And I think another important aspect is being intentional. We can't just drift through life and hope to stumble across those star-worthy moments.
So you got to be deliberate.
Yeah, we need to be. Seeking God's guidance and asking, how can I live in a way that honors him?
It's almost like setting your compass towards eternity.
Exactly. And, everyone's path will look a little different depending on their gifts, circumstances, what they're called to do. But the basic principle is the same. To live each day with purpose, trying to make a difference for the kingdom of God.
So it's not just about those like big dramatic things, it's about the everyday choices.
Right. It's about those small things that show who we are, what we believe.
This is making me rethink some things about my own priorities. Am I living with eternity in mind? Am I using my time well?
Those are some really important questions for all of us to consider. But remember, it's not about being perfect, okay?
Right.
It's about progress.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah, and it's encouraging to know that even those little acts of kindness, the things that maybe no one else sees, God notices.
That's a good reminder. So even if it feels small, if it's done with a heart surrendered to God, it matters.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And those small acts can have a much bigger impact than we realize.
This whole concept of living with eternity in mind is, it's kind of overwhelming, but it's also pretty motivating. It gives your life meaning. It's something beyond just what we experience here.
I think so too. It gives you hope, encourages you. You know your efforts aren't pointless. God sees that. He rewards that faithfulness.
It's good to be reminded of that. This has been a really interesting conversation. I feel like I'm starting to get a handle on these heavenly crowns and how important they really are.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It does. And I feel like we could talk about this for hours, but unfortunately, we're just about out of time for this segment.
Too bad. We'll have to pick this up again sometime.
We will. But for now, we got to take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll keep unpacking this idea of living with an eternal perspective. Welcome back to the deep dive. This whole conversation about crowns in heaven has really been eye-opening for me. It's easy to get so caught up in the day-to-day that you kind of lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Thinking about eternity can definitely put things in perspective. But I could also see how it might feel a little overwhelming to some folks.
Oh, for sure.
Like hearing about all these crowns and rewards Some people might think they have to be perfect all the time to earn them.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, every decision suddenly feels so heavy, like I'm being judged on, I don't know, some cosmic level. How are we supposed to keep that in mind without, like, freaking out about every little thing?
I think I think it's really about understanding God's grace. Like these crowns, we don't earn those by being perfect. They're gifts given out of love.
Oh, okay. So it's not about striving for perfection, but just remembering we're loved already, no matter what.
Exactly. Our salvation, it's not based on our performance or anything we do. It's based on what Christ has already done for us.
That does take some pressure off, for sure.
It should. Because then you can approach this whole idea of rewards with excitement, rather than fear.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we, like, cultivate that kind of heart, that desire to please God and live a life that shows his love?
Well, I think it starts with just spending time with God.
Yeah.
Getting to know him better through reading the Bible, praying. The more you experience his love and grace, the more your heart just naturally wants to respond.
It's like any relationship, I guess. The more you care about someone, the more you want to do things that make them happy.
That's a great way to put it. And as your love for God grows, you'll find yourself wanting to live in a way that honors him. Not because you have to, but because you actually want to.
Yeah, out of joy and gratitude.
Exactly. And those stars we were talking about,
Yeah.
the ones that represent our impact,
Yeah.
those become a natural overflow of that love.
So it's not about keeping score, but just about loving God and sharing that love. But how does that actually, play out in real life?
I think it can be really simple things like just showing kindness to a stranger, helping someone in need, saying something encouraging to someone who's having a tough time. It's about being a reflection of God's love no matter what you're doing.
I love that. It's like not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love.
Exactly. And those little acts, when you do them with a heart surrendered to God,
Mm.
they can have a huge impact, way bigger than we can imagine.
It's pretty amazing to think about, It
hmm
makes you want to really pay attention to how you treat people, how you spend your time, all of that.
It definitely changes your perspective, that's for sure. And that's the beautiful thing about this whole concept of heavenly crowns. It's not just about some far-off reward. It's about living a life that matters right now.
Wow. Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive into heavenly crowns. This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. I feel like I have a totally different understanding now of what it means to live a life that counts for eternity.
Me too. It's a powerful reminder that our lives aren't just about what we achieve here on earth, but about the impact we make for God's kingdom.
And that starts with giving our hearts to him, letting his love work through us, and touching the lives of those around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And, we just encourage you to keep thinking about these ideas. Seek God's guidance as you live out your faith.
Remember, everyone, your life has eternal significance. So let's all try to live in a way that shows God's love and grace, knowing that he sees and appreciates every effort we make.
That's right. Keep seeking, keep growing, and keep shining.